let's get into this episode 2 of Got Your Back's Comedy Nerd Out. In this episode, the Frank Mills Special.
That's right. The amazing improv troupe, the Frank Mills. 3 of the members are featured. First off, we have
Mr. Michael Jastroch. He's a co-owner of Cold Town Theater. He also teaches workshops regularly here in Austin. If you're ever looking for, he does like these short, sort of whiplash intensive, sort of personal diagnostic.
He doesn't throw chairs though. It's much more mellow than that. But it is an intense experience because you will grow as an improviser leaps and bounds. It's 5 hours for 2 days in a row, and it's quite an experience.
Yeah. Also, just a tremendous improviser. Does a lot of. When I was first watching improv, he did a lot of characters where I was like, oh, they like blew my mind. I was just like new characters I hadn't seen, but that were definitely like part of the collective consciousness, you know? So I really appreciate Jastroch's sort of taste and voice, artistic discretion. He's a great improviser.
And his passion for teaching, it's palatable. Like taking classes with him and taking workshops with him. He cares so much about the craft and about getting people to become better players. He's really an inspiration in so many ways.
Yeah. Coming up after him in the show, we have Mr. Dave Buckman, which again, just a powerhouse mainstay of the Austin improv community. Dave also is a faculty member of Cold Town, an original faculty member. He was the artistic director at Boom Chicago in Amsterdam for a couple of years. He's Chicago trained, could not be more talented. A tremendous director. Just got done directing a show called Austin Translation, which ran for 2 months and was just extended for another month because it was great. His video does have some sketches that he uses as video examples that we had to cut out. But if you go to this link, gorbpodcast.com/Dave, you can see we've put up links to all the videos that he played so you can watch them along with this or go back and watch them afterwards so you're not missing out on anything.
He also does an advanced improv boot camp where you get individual notes. He does that on a regular basis here in Austin, Texas, as well as really cool classes like how to coach better, straight absurd stuff, getting personal. He does all sorts of great, amazing classes. So it's worth being on his mailing list because those come up a lot and they are groundbreaking and will make you a better improviser.
Yeah, we're again lucky to have him here. And speaking of lucky to have them, our final speaker in this episode, Miss Erika May-McNichol, who again just some of the best characters I've ever seen. One of those improvisers, like Casey, I think you said, like you go see and just every time reinvigorates you, inspires you. You're like, oh, that's why I do this, because this is possible. These things like Erika May-McNichol does on stage.
Absolutely, yeah. Her commitment on stage, just how smooth she is with like kind of the fundamental stuff. She just gets like groundwork laid out so comfortably and smoothly. I think I've said it on pretty much every Got Your Back podcast where she's come up. Her ability to create names and put those as part of the reality in such a smooth and comfortable and natural way is a skill set that every improviser should have. I know I try and reach for that brass ring on a show-to-show basis.
Yeah, we're lucky and, again, thankful to have her as part of our community.
She's an inspiration.
Yeah, and she as well had some videos as part of her speech. You can go to this link, gorbpodcast.com/Erika with a K, to get links to her videos as well, so you can watch them along with her video. So, other than that, we just need to let you know that there was a musical guest in this episode as well, Mr. Joseph Daly, along with some violin or viola being played.
Or fiddle.
Is it more appropriate, probably, being played by Bobby Stover. They played a couple of really great songs that they put together. You can search Joseph Daly online if you'd like to find more of his music. And they both also are tremendous improvisers
and actors
as well. So, yeah, if you'd like to cast them in something or even just get a nice autographed 8x10 of them to fall asleep to, I'm sure that they will accommodate for you. So that's all we need to let you know about in this episode. Please enjoy our first speaker, Mr. Michael Jastroch.
Yay me! Hello! How is everyone this evening? Good? Awesome. So, I did not commit my little TED Talk here to memory. So I'll be reading it. And I entitled this... It's about improv. I entitled this The Importance of Doing, or The Unified Field Theory of Bad Scene Work. Interior, Cold Town Theater, night. 2 bearded 20-somethings in glasses, for the sake of anonymity, we'll call them Guy 1 and Guy 2, walk onto a 4x9 scrap of plywood. Guy 1 half pretends to chop vegetables. Guy 2 watches Guy 1 chop vegetables for a few beats and then says, "You sure are chopping vegetables absurdly." Guy 1 responds, yes, I am chopping these vegetables in an absurd way. Just a few moments ago, I was also doing something weird that was slightly different than this. And this conversation goes back and forth for about 3 minutes, talking about all the funny things that happened, and then there's a sweep edit. Another scene. Interior hideout theater, night. 2 imps wearing corsets walk into a much nicer piece of plywood. The first imp says, today is the day that something important will happen to us. And the second responds, yes, this thing that will happen will cause us to grow and change. This continues for some time. People talk about their feelings. A story happens, then the lights go down. We spend a lot of time agonizing over the little differences between game-based and narrative improv. But I'd argue that both of these super fake scenes that I totally created for the sake of rhetoric suck for the same exact and completely fixable reason that all scenes that suck for. Nothing happened. Zero, zilch, nada. Not a single thing in those scenes happened. In the game scene, 2 people came out and made with the funny by talking about all the funny cuckoo things. And they talked about the funny stuff, but nothing funny actually happened in the scene. It's like watching a highlight reel of a much funnier scene that happened somewhere off stage in a different show. In the narrative scene, 2 people came out and tried to tell an engaging story via boring exposition. If we were writing a screenplay, these kinds of scenes would be the very first scenes to go. If we were a novelist, our editor would have run these scenes through with red ink. If we were in a creative writing 101 class, our teacher would have reminded us of a very fundamental, important truth. Show, don't tell. To put it another way, if you've gone down your premise-based checklist and you're not getting any laughs, it's because you're talking about the funny thing instead of doing the funny thing. If you think that the audience's complete silence was because they were really into your intense emotions and acting prowess, I've got some terrible news. There was a really big chance that actually they were just bored shitless watching you. Watching you wallow in self-indulgent, what my acting teacher calls schmacting. And I'm sorry, I feel pretty strongly about this, but I'm not really sorry, and I'm sorry that I'm not sorry. I bring good news, though. There's an easy to implement solution to fix this problem of nothing happening in our scenes. It's a trick that writers and good actors have known since the dawn of time. It's an easy fix to make 95% of your scenes go well every single time. It's a powerful weapon in the war against boredom. Make the characters in the scene do something. Right now, in this exact precise moment in time, not to talk about doing something in the future or having done something in the past, but right now, this very moment, fucking do something in the scene. Example, let's say you wanted to do a scene about crashing your dad's car. I like how I did that as if it's a spontaneous example I just came up with off the top of my head. Didn't prepare, put a lot of thought into today. Well, just off the top of my head, a scene about, let's say you want to do a scene about crashing your dad's car. First impulse, the first way most people will start that scene is they'll come out and say, to give the initiation, Dad, I crashed your car. It's not a horrible initiation. There's a lot of information there. There's some nugget of something fun, but it's not great either because you're immediately talking about something that happened in the past outside of this moment in time. That's exposition. Exposition is boring. And now we have to do a ton of work to create something interesting at the top of that scene. We have to do more work, and more work means less fun, means more opportunity for the audience to lose interest in what you're doing on stage, and the audience losing interest means a bigger likelihood of you doing a shitty scene, which means a bigger likelihood of you hating yourself after the show and eating a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Instead, we might start the scene with some sort of action. For example, like the initiation. Dad, I'm having trouble controlling the car. That's a great initiation. Okay, that's good. It's a little better. Suddenly there are stakes that are immediate. Something's happening right here in this moment. We know that there's a son and a dad in a car, and the son's having trouble controlling it. It's happening right here in this point in time. Something interesting is happening that's worth watching, but we're not quite there yet, so I'm going to give that scene start a B. Solid B. It's not a scene yet because a scene involves 2 or more people doing something. You haven't involved the other character in what you're doing, so it's not a scene yet. You've done something, but not to, with, or inside the other human being that you're sharing the stage with. So another initiation might be, Dad, grab the steering wheel, I can't control it. I'll give that initiation an A. I'll give myself an A for that initiation. It's good. You're trying to get your dad to grab the wheel of your car, and suddenly you have a scene with 2 or more people interacting in an interesting way. It's got a relationship, and it has the nuggets of a game and or an engaging story. And while I'm at it, let me also fix the vegetable chopping scene from the beginning of my little speech here. Guy 1 is chopping vegetables. Guy 2 is watching, and instead of pointing out the funny way guy number 1 is chopping the vegetables, if he says something like, I have to get those vegetables out because there's very important dinner guests, you're being too sloppy. And then he gingerly moves the vegetables onto a tray, shaking his head. Suddenly, that simple action between the 2 people has created something interesting and watchable, as opposed to boring and unwatchable. I just fixed 2 made-up scenes that I did. Good. So we're told this stuff a whole bunch in improv classes, right? We're told to do scenes where we make active choices. We're told to work on our space work. We're told to give ourselves an active activity to do at the top of the scene. And yet, for most of us, as we kind of go through classes, the problem that I see as a teacher coming up time and time again are just scene after scene where literally nothing happens. Just 2 people talking at each other in a void, hoping something interesting happens. You're told to make these active choices time and time again, but you don't consistently carry these notes into practice as you start to improvise. I kind of wonder why that's the case. Why we're told this time and time in classes, but why don't we consistently act on it in the first few years that we're learning how to improvise? When it comes to improv, I think it probably has a lot to do with fear. We didn't get a script for the scene, and we're worried that if we make a big choice, we're going to create some sort of insurmountable scene paradox, and all of improv will come tumbling down, and the theater will burn down, and everyone will flee into the woods in a panic, and everyone will hate us. At least that's what goes through my head when I'm on stage right now. But the reality is that all drama and comedy and storytelling, all of it actually comes from the fun, unpredictable, and sometimes conflicting intersections of characters with different agendas operating at cross purposes. So the very thing that we're subconsciously trying to avoid, contradicting each other, is the very thing that is actually going to make these scenes go. We also don't act on this note to make active choices, to do things in our scene consistently, because the whole idea of doing is masquerading inside of another lesson under an assumed name when we learn the term crow. Crow is an improv term that we learned, stands for character, relationship, objective, where, emotion, a bunch of stuff that just means what's the scene's deal. But usually most teachers that I've seen or taken, they kind of tend to gloss over the O part, the objective. The objective, your character's objective, is what drives the action of the scene. It is what the doing is about. And it's hiding there in plain sight. But usually a lot of teachers focus most of their lessons around creating fun comedy characters, strong relationships, reacting emotionally, space work. They focus on all the other letters of crow, except for the poor O gets ignored. But that's actually the most important part of the scene, the objective. Your objective drives what you're doing in the scene, what the characters are doing in the scene. And the doing defines the character and creates a relationship. And the act of doing produces emotions. I think this lesson might be glossed over for a few reasons by teachers. Maybe it's because the word objective is too soft, it's too mushy. It makes for a good acronym. It spells out the word crow. But I like to use the word need. What's your character's need? What does your character need out of this scene, out of the world, out of the other person they're sharing the stage with? I like to tell people to make the very first choice that they make in every single scene what they need from the other person. It can be physical. I need this guy to give me a hot dog. Classic scene start. It can be emotional. I need this guy to give me respect. And then your job as an improviser is to go get that thing. Human beings are like Sims. every one of us has little status bars above our head for food, shelter, love, cleanliness, sometimes pornography. And when those need meters kind of flash above our heads, it causes us to do stuff to get those needs fulfilled. It drives our action. And when we have another need another person can fulfill, we have meaningful interactions with those people. And meaningful interactions are very watchable and interesting. So try it for a while in your scene work. Consciously try to make the first line of your scene something along the lines of, I need fill in the blank from you, or I need you to fill in the blank. And when you get that muscle memory ingrained, you can try less clunky dialogue, maybe more subtle ways of communicating those needs. And then when some time passes, maybe you can just feel the need, what you need from the other person in your gut. But by focusing on your character's needs, on the doing, that has a few other benefits as well. Focusing on the doing, first of all, it more closely resembles the way we actually behave in everyday life. By focusing on our activity, we get closer to actually living the scene that's happening as opposed to being trapped in our head trying to be clever. Real people operate because they're driven by needs, and we can act that same way on stage when we're making shit up. The other thing is that doing stuff on stage with your hands, getting in your environment, it distracts the thinky part of your brain and helps us to stay out of our own way as actors, as performers. By focusing on action, our acting becomes more truthful. There are a lot of performers out there who love to revel in the emotions of their scenes. The kind of people that get off stage and say like, oh, did you see how powerful my feelings were in that scene? Did you see me cry? I cried real tears. I felt something. I've actually heard this from improvisers. Congratulations. Congratulations. But the reality is emotions are always a byproduct of our actions and our interactions. They flow from what we're doing. They flow from what's being done to us. They flow from our needs being met or not met. Anything else, any other method of acting is less than truthful. It's melodrama for the sake of melodrama. It's emoting for the sake of emoting. It's masturbatory. Good acting does not equal emotions. Good acting is truthful behavior in imaginary circumstances. And I'd argue that good acting, truthful behavior, is doubly important when you're doing a scene about farting space monkeys. I'd argue that, and I have. And don't just take my word for it. Listen to this quote from a famous actor. For me, acting is doing. That actor, Pierce Brosnan. I Googled that. But I'm also not making this up. I wish these thoughts that I'm kind of spewing out here, I wish I could take credit for them. Generations of actors, acting teachers, screenwriters, novelists, famous acting trainers, schools of theatrical thought, they've all known this. And I think all of us in this room also know this because even if we've never really thought about it before, every time we've rolled our eyes at a scene that happens in a movie, every dumb, shitty, dumb, boring boredom that ever bored, even boredom itself, the very definition of boredom probably involves the words "nothing happened." Bad scene work is always, I'll make a bold statement, always a product of nothing happening in the moment. There's nothing happening. It's just people talking and having exposition and talking about something happening outside of the here and now. So to sum up, do the following thing every single time and you'll almost never do a shitty scene again. That's my promise because I've put it into practice. Come out, look at the other person, decide what you need from them, and then do stuff to get it. Congratulations, I just fixed every bad scene that you'll ever do. The end.
All right. This is a multimedia event, so not only do you get great information and knowledge from great teachers like Michael Jastroch, we also have music that's happening this evening. That's what this station is here for. Let me introduce Mr. Joseph Daly and Robin Stromer. gonna play some music for you. Enjoy.
Thank you. Bobby, you can join. Yeah. Oh, great. It's like, where the fuck is Bobby? We're gonna tune real quick. I'm kidding. You ready?
Let's do it.
If they tie you to tracks before the train rolls on in, I'd cut all the ropes just as fast as I can, and I'd set you aside before I left to defeat the man who thought he'd take you away from me. And I'd take you back home, make sure you're alright, watch you fall asleep before I turn out the lights, and I'd whisper goodnight, and I'd hit the road. That's what I'd do if I were your hero. And if you cry for help in the hands of an ape, I take off my glasses and put on my cape. To the top of the tower I'd hastily fly, and I'd strike some fear in the great King Kong's eyes. And as he loosened his grip, I'd scoop you right up, though we'd never look back as his roars would erupt. And I'd set you back down, and off to work I would go. That's what I'd do if I were your hero. I'd trade my cape for a suit any day, and I'd trade my knife for a pretty bouquet, and I'd trade my fight for the grace of a dove, and I'd trade my strength for the power of love. And if you must work late because your boss said I'd feed the children and put them to bed, and I'd tell them a story, and I'd tuck them in and let them know I'm their father and also the friend. And I'd tell you I love you more than you could know. That's what I'd do if I were your hero.
All right. Give it up one more time for Bobby Sarah, Joseph Kay. Our next speaker is a titan of the AIC, Mr. Dave Buckman.
Thank you, guys. Very beautiful. I'd like to preface this talk with the acknowledgement that the term straight man is gender biased. There have been countless female comedians throughout the history of comedy, and many of them are brilliant in the straight role. So forgive me if I continue to use the terms he or man or guy when delving into the subject matter. It's not meant to discount the contributions to the genre by the likes of Tina Fey, Jane Curtin, Candice Bergen, Pamela Adlon, Mary Tyler Moore, Abby Jacobson, and even on this stage by Steph Cook, Ashley Franks, and Naomi Perryman. But rather, I'm using it as a shortcut for brevity. The straight guy is a quote. The straight guy is never given enough credit for framing a gag, for the architecture, for the support, for the drive. He does everything except the punchline. That is a quote about Bud Abbott by Mel Brooks. Definition, straight man. A member of a comedy act who plays a stooge or a foil, feeding lines to a partner who in turn replies with usually humorous quips. Despite the names often given to the roles, the straight man need not be humorless, and it is not always the comic who provides the act's humor. Sometimes it's the straight man who gets the laughs through his or her sarcastic reactions to the comic's antics. But for every Mork, we must have a Mindy. For every Balky, we must have a Larry. For every Farley, a Spade. History. The template for the modern double act began in the British music halls and the American vaudeville scene in the late 19th century. Here, the straight man was a necessity, as he would repeat the lines of the comic. This was done simply because the audience would be noisy, and repeating the joke gave the audience a fighting chance of hearing the joke, and the comedians a fighting chance of getting a good reaction. Soon, the dynamic develops that the straight man became a more integral part of the act, setting up jokes so that the comic could then deliver the punchline to. They're not seen too much these days, but there was a time in this country when comedy duos haunted the pop culture landscape, the same way in which pop culture self-awareness does today. Abbott and Costello, Laurel and Hardy, Burns and Allen, Martin and Lewis, Nichols and May, Burns and Schreiber, Brooks and Reiner, Rowan and Martin, the Smothers Brothers, Pryor and Wilder, Aykroyd and Belushi, Fay and Poehler. Like roving packs of boy bands, comedy duos would haunt movies, radio broadcasts, television, and award shows with stirring regularity, leaving their mark on pop consciousness forever. The dynamic was simple and easy to imitate. One fellow would be the buffoon, who constantly mishears orders, bumbles plans, and spews malapropisms. The straight man played the role of the straight-laced thinker, the clear-headed one, the stone face charged with acting as the foil for the comedy stylings of his hyperactive partner. The straight man rarely gets the funny lines, but has to have impeccable timing and delivery so that the clown can hit it out of the park. The clown is the punchline teller, but the straight man has the indispensable job of setting up the joke. It may not seem like it from an immediate examination, but that is a very vital skill to comedy. What's more, they keep the wildness grounded just a little bit. If there were two clowns, we've seen how bad that can get in some certain sitcoms and films. Dumb and Dumber being among the best of the exceptions, but even then it can get a little grating, even to lowest common denominator comedy fans like myself. According to improv legend Miles Stroth, my level 5 teacher at IO, the straight man is an aggressive position. That is, you are actively seeking out things that are wrong. If there's nothing wrong, you can add information to make it wrong. The best straight men are so good, they can sometimes get laughs just by delivering a straight line so well that the audience knows that it's coming. This is essentially the basis of Bob Newhart's telephone routines. He was playing the straight man to nothing, which is very hard to do. Before I delve into a list of different types of straight characters, I should caution that not on this list is the type the only sensible character or the only sane man. While straight men and only sane man can and often do overlap, it's pretty rare to have one of each in the same piece. But the straight man and the only sane man are not automatically the same character. So the only sane man can be exemplified by Jerry Seinfeld in Seinfeld, or Tina Fey as Liz Lemon in 30 Rock, or the best of the best, Jason Bateman in Arrested Development. Here now is a list of different types of straight man, and this list is inspired by the teachings of Miles Stroth and originally culled from Sean London, who is an improv blogger in Los Angeles. I'll give proper credit where credit is due. Number one, the clean straight, exemplified by Adam Scott in Party Down. The clean straight is your classic straight man. He knows what's wrong and calls attention to it. He is simply a wall that all absurdity bounces off of. He calls out everything. Nothing slips past him. Everything that's not right gets called out. The more specifically you call out something, the more you get laughs. But most of the work of the clean straight is simply calling things out. It's worth noting that all straights are just a variation or amplification of the clean straight. Number 2, the angry straight, exemplified by Larry David in Curb Your Enthusiasm. The angry straight doesn't like the absurd. He wants the absurd to stop what he's doing, and he gets more and more upset as the scene progresses. Anytime a character storms off in a Saturday Night Live sketch after their current character does their thing for 4 or 7 minutes, you're basically dealing with an angry straight. If you keep heightening him enough, he also becomes absurd. No one did this better than Dick Smothers of the Smothers Brothers. So I'd like to show a quick clip of an angry straight in action, one of the best, Dick Smothers. Good. All right. Number 3, the everyday straight, Jack Benny in The Jack Benny Show. The everyday straight is a straight man who encounters the absurd, but they have no relationship. This is like when you're playing a character in an improv scene at a bus stop, and then a weirdo sits down next to you. And then the everyday straight tries to avoid confrontation at first, but most of the responses are, "Excuse me?" Or "Is this a joke?" Or "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" Or "I have to go." So usually you're playing against a complete stranger. Number 4, straight as host. Seth Meyers on Weekend Update, or Woody Allen's character in Annie Hall. The straight as a host is played as yourself, or very close to your actual persona. This type requires a lot of confidence and charisma, and usually requires you to be very funny and very sharp. Number 5, the absurd straight, Cheech and Chong, where each character tries to out-absurd the other, which in turn makes the other the straight man in a fluid exchange of roles. This type of straight comedy comes in handy when there is no straight man. So for the scene to work, you need to say the things that a straight man would say, but without ruining the integrity of the absurdity. So let's show that clip of a classic, one of the best Cheech and Chong scenes there are. That's good. In the Cheech and Chong movies, they use this type of comedy to very popular effect, representing the fluid movement of the status and the blurring of the lines of authority that exemplified the political turbulence of the 1970s. Number 6, straight as victim. Chris Parnell in most of his Saturday Night Live sketches. Whenever the straight man is about to be hurt in some way, they can play straight as victim and say things that make it worse for him, completely oblivious to the oncoming danger. For example, if someone starts an improv date scene with you and says solemnly, "Honey, I have something really important to tell you," you can recognize to yourself, "Oh, this person is about to break up with me, and let me make it worse for them." Then respond in character with, "And I have important news for you too, I bought us a puppy." Basically, anytime your scene partner wants to do anything negative to you, one option is to play straight as victim. It'll be funny to make it worse for you, and the game is built in. Let's show that Chris Parnell clip. All right, so yeah. He doesn't get the job. So I love that example because Chris Parnell enters that heightening the reality of such a workplace and maintaining the ridiculousness of, if you had worked in an office, that might be something that you would do in order to finally stand up to your boss, so that Will Ferrell's character can go even bigger than we would all ever eventually expect. So 2 last examples I want to give you about the 2, I think, the best straight men in the business. Bud Abbott and Margaret Dumont. In the classic routine, Bud Abbott had to say who's on first with just the right degree of earnestness and irritation so that Lou Costello could get his big laughs. And while Lou Costello, the funny, fat, nervous street guy, was always the recipient of the laughs and would get just about every single punchline in Abbott and Costello's history, Bud Abbott was the quietly suffering straight man who would toss out the setups with the best of them. If comedy's about timing, nobody had better timing than Bud Abbott. Bud Abbott was able to uncannily get into a rapid-fire argument with Lou Costello, say goofy things, keep the energy high, and still seem grounded in control and sane. He was the rock. If the comedy of Lou Costello may have been funny on its own, but Bud Abbott was an all-important anchor. He was an example that all straight men should look to. But when you think of the Marx Brothers, the words restraint and balance rarely come up. What we think of is the chaotic jazz-like riffing on reality done by out-of-control, childlike hell babies. We think how much glee they took in tearing down even the simplest of conversational niceties. We think of the wry slapstick skewering of the upper class. We think of the jokes of Groucho, the mime of Harpo, and the conniving of Chico. But where would all these conventions and upper class snootiness come from? The answer was Margaret Dumont, who played the stiff society dame in 7 of the Marx Brothers feature films. Like the brothers, her name and station would always change, would change from film to film, but she was also always essentially playing the same role. In her case, a rich, blue-blooded, obsessed with class, manners and status, and yet irresistibly and romantically attracted to Groucho. She was the soundboard for the brothers and offered all the best setups. You can't marry both of us, that's bigamy, to which Groucho would say, that is bigamy too. What Dumont offered was not deep character. She rarely stretched beyond the fur-wearing rich lady and rarely gave her characters any sort of depth or backstory, but instead a playful playmate, someone who's willing time and time again to riff with these guys. In terms of staying straight in the face of comedic chaos, the substantial Margaret Dumont was an anchor better than the rest. She is my absolute number one. So let's show that very quick clip and we'll wrap up. That's good. All right. Yeah, her facial expressions, her timing, her ability just to kind of keep never getting frustrated, always going right back into the well to keep setting him up. And just to conclude, the importance of the straight man in improv and comedy is to ground the scene to some recognizable reality. The better they do this, the better the absurd can go absolutely nuts. Thank you very much.
It's that time once again to welcome Joseph Daly and Bobby Stover up to play another song for us.
I swear I saw a monster curled up on my closet floor. I admit I almost shit myself before I slammed the door. I ran into my mommy's room. She said, go back to bed. Monsters don't exist, they only live inside your head. Well, I don't like a horror flick stuck on repeat, and it frightens me, you know, that when my eyes are closed, my dreams decide to coincide with the things I fear the most. They live inside my head, how's that supposed to comfort me? So I arm myself with pots and pans and kitchen cutlery. I swing open my closet door and see I disappeared. I leap into my bed and warn him I still know you're here. Well, I don't ever want to go to sleep. It's like a horror flick stuck on repeat, and it frightens me to know that when my eyes are closed, monster towers over me, and the earth begins to quake. He bends over to eat me, and I'm suddenly awake. Well, I don't ever want to go to sleep. It's like a horror flick stuck on repeat, and it frightens me to know that when my eyes are closed, my dreams decide to coincide with the things I fear the most. My dreams decide to coincide with the things I fear the most. My dreams decide to coincide with the things I fear the
Our next speaker for this evening is Erika May-McNichol. Please welcome her to the stage.
So I'm here to talk about women in comedy, and when Cody asked and Casey asked me to do something about something, I thought I'd just come and talk to you guys about things I think are funny. So that's what this is. I don't have as academic as a premise as Jastroch and Buckman, but we'll get going. So forward, please, into the fog. I'm going to kind of divide up my speech into 3 parts, and that's to give you a context of the history of women in comedy, a glib comparison of female and male comedians, and then if there's time, I'll just hold forth until they cut me off. All right, let's go to the next one. So, an abbreviated history. So, the first funny lady, way back 10 to 25,000 years ago, very first lady comedian came on the scene. She did largely observational comedy about beasts and fowl. She was really well known for her wit, and so, her partner was like, let's get together a group, and she agreed in a moment of probably not sticking up for herself very well to call it Adam and His Rib. And so they started doing shows all over Paradise. It was a big hit. Everyone loved it. Finally, they started getting asked to do some festival circuits. They knew they made it big when the dinosaurs were like, hey, come do your show for us in a dinosaur comedy festival. Eventually, she broke off and became her own one-woman writing and performance show. But by then, it was soured. All the other folks that were in high positions decided that she shouldn't be around Paradise anymore. And once she started doing 2-person things with a serpent, she was cast out of the Garden of Paradise. And so women in comedy was really set back for a long time. Until we got to vaudeville. And this, as you can probably tell, my speech is not necessarily academic. I haven't gone through and done serious studies. So if I look over your favorite lady comedian, let's talk about it, and you can share clips with me, and it'll all come out in the wash. But vaudeville, so vaudeville's really interesting, and this is an era that I wasn't really familiar with, but until I started watching, actually, Marx Brothers films. And something that's really interesting to me is when vaudeville kind of became larger, people were touring, the biggest stars in vaudeville, with the Marx Brothers kind of being some exception to that, and maybe some Al Jolsons, were the women. And the hypothesis is that women were more pleasant to look upon. They could sing and dance. And so a woman who was both funny and could sing and dance could make a shitload of money in vaudeville. And there are several examples of this. And they were actually some of the wealthiest women in the country at that point in time. So you've got like Ethel Merman and Fanny Bryce, Margaret Dumont, who was later in the Marx Brothers shows. But one person that I want to call out that wasn't directly involved in vaudeville, but probably made the biggest contribution to this to this kind of era of comedy, and what later went on to be the Marx Brothers empire was Minnie Marx. She was the mother of the Marx Brothers, and if you look at the history of the Marx family, their father was a dancer and then a very shitty tailor. And so he would have to bribe people off. I don't think he refused to use measuring tapes. So often his hem work was very bad. And so they would have to bribe people off by him cooking them food, which is one of his true talents. Minnie Marx, on the other hand, was the daughter of a ventriloquist and an opera singer. And so she had grown up around performance. Her brother later became a comedian of some note. And it's hypothesized that she was really the one that taught them kind of their sense of comedic timing and their ensemble. So she definitely had a very indelible mark in the success of the Marx Brothers in the vaudeville period. I want to also talk about someone who I think everyone knows about, Lucille Ball. I feel like that's a ridiculous question, but there's also people that were born in 1992 in this room, so we all know who Lucille Ball is, right? So, yeah. So she was actually, she became the first female movie mogul. She formed a production company with her husband, Desi, called Desi Lou, and they produced the I Love Lucy show, which was a huge hit. That production company actually later became the production company for series like Star Trek and Mission Impossible. She continued to try to perform, after I Love Lucy had kind of faded from memory, but never quite reached that kind of first pinnacle of success that she had with the I Love Lucy show. And so anyone who loves I Love Lucy loves this next clip that I'm going to ask them to put up. This is the Chocolate Factory sketch, and the setup here is that they've been asked to wrap these chocolates as quickly as possible. The stakes are set up, and you can kind of see the ridiculousness unfold. So cue that beautiful clip.
What are you doing up here? Oh,
That show. All right, so moving on, Elaine May is incredible. I actually wasn't familiar with her work in like any large detail until I started hanging out with my husband, Bob McNichol, who's an archivist of all things media. And Elaine May and Mike Nichols, Dave mentioned them in his duo chats, was an incredibly witty. She was also very attractive, which helped her kind of carry over to the screen very easily. But she started with the Compass Players in Chicago while attending the University of Chicago, and which later became Second City. And what I think is really, they met cute. Mike Nichols and he had observed her doing some sketch work and was really taken with her wit and talent, and actually saw her in the Randolph CTA station and sat down next to her and in a Russian accent asked her if he could sit down, please. And she replied without blinking, "If you wish." And so they went through this little like Russian spy thing, and I think eventually they decided to do comedy together. But she's an incredibly insightful woman, and I wasn't able to find the clip that I really would like to show, just because at Mike Nichols' death, the folks that hold the copyrights to the Nichols and May stuff kind of scoured the internet and made people remove it. But this particular clip, I think, is a good demonstration of the characters that she would do. And it's Mike Nichols calling his mother. It'll actually start in the middle of the sketch, so you're going to kind of miss some of the setup, but you get a sense for her comedic chops. So if you've never checked out Elaine May, Nichols and May stuff, I highly suggest it. There's a really wonderful sketch that I wanted to do instead. It's two teenagers kind of meeting and making out in the car. And she does this really wonderful thing that I've aped before for my own comedic purposes, where they're making out and her hand is here, and it's kind of crawling around on her face as she's trying to make out with Mike Nichols. So she's amazing, very good. Imogene Coca. So your show of shows, pretty significant in terms of comedy canon. I believe Woody Allen wrote for the show, as well as being a huge Sid Caesar show of shows. So Sid Caesar was kind of the main writer behind it. But Imogene Coca and he were pretty consistent duo, and she had this kind of very rubbery face and like physicalization that reminds me a lot of like what you see with Kristen Wiig when she's kind of doing her more demonstrative and physical character. So I found this clip, and I found it so delightful. They are basically pretending like they are doing all of the percussion work for the overture of 1812, or the 1812 overture. And so go ahead and play that sweet reel. So from the 1950s, you know, there were certainly female comedians in the 60s. I don't mean to give you that impression that nothing happened then. We had, you know, people like Phyllis Diller, and I really haven't touched on a lot of the stand-ups. I'm going to focus mainly on people that were either individuals that ended up carrying over into sketch or were heavily into character work. So the next set, let's go to the next slide. So SNL kind of started, but prior to that, you had, you know, the Mary Tyler Moore Show that started in the 1970s, also the Carol Burnett Show that ended up running for about 11 years. And then you had people like Lily Tomlin. She started as a stand-up and then moved to Rowan and Martin Laugh-In. She has a lot of notable characters, and if you have ever seen the sketch on SNL where it's the "we don't care, we don't have to, we're the phone company," that was her character, Ernestine. She also did another little precocious character named Edith Ann, who would kind of sit in a big rocking chair and talk about making disgusting sandwiches and kind of seeing inappropriate adult behavior. And it's really interesting in kind of researching Lily Tomlin for the speech. She's one of only 3 women who's ever won a Grammy for her solo album, the other 2 of which are Whoopi Goldberg and Kathy Griffin. So she also, for those of you that are a little bit younger, if you watch The Magic School Bus, she was the voice of Miss Frizzle, Miss Frizzell. I have to watch that ad nauseum, so I was driven crazy by whose voice is this for a long time, and then I finally looked it up and made the connection. So other folks that are on this list, I don't necessarily have clips for them. Obviously, Gilda Radner, I'm not going to spend a lot of time or have specific clips for her. I think anyone who saw the SNL anniversary show saw lots of send-ups to Gilda Radner and was incredibly talented. Rosanna Dana, and kind of the awkward characters that she would play with Bill Murray were delightful. This next clip that I wanted to play actually includes Gilda Radner, Jane Curtin, and Lorraine Newman, as well as Lily Tomlin. It's a very short clip of when Lily Tomlin was on SNL and had this sketch that was basically about male sexual harassment. So that was segueing into probably one of my personal favorites, Carol Burnett. As I mentioned, she had her own show. The Carol Burnett Show launched the careers of people such as Vicki Lawrence, who later did Mama's Family, Tim Conway, take him or leave him. And she was incredibly talented, and actually the Carol Burnett Show kind of came out of her love of song, dance, and sketch. So this clip that I am going to be playing is actually from Annie, where she does a song with Albert Finney, who is playing Daddy Warbucks. Singing and ladies! Oh, so good. Jane Curtin, of course, is the person on Point and Counterpoint with Dan Aykroyd, for which this quote-unquote speech is named, Jane, You Ignorant Slut. Also an excellent straight woman, as mentioned in Dave's speech. Let's go to the next slide, just because I want to be careful of time. So 80s and 90s were a great time for especially stand-up comedy, as stand-up comedy became kind of de rigueur in terms of the comedic appetite of America. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Rosie O'Donnell or Ellen DeGeneres, and then the return of Phyllis Diller on Hollywood Squares. But that's where I did learn about Phyllis Diller myself growing up. But someone that I do want to spend some time on is Jan Hooks. She recently passed away, and if you were not familiar with Jan Hooks' work before she passed away, or you saw Pee-wee's Big Adventure, she is the tour guide in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. And she just had an incredible knack, especially in her work with Phil Hartman, the scene or the sketch that they did that was just so like beautifully textured, and it was funny, and it was also sweet and a little bit heartbreaking. Love is a Dream. Life is a Dream, rather. I'm not going to show that here, but I did want to show a sketch that's not well known amongst people that watch SNL, or at least it wasn't to me until a couple of years ago when I started revisiting her work. But this is a sketch that includes her, Nora Dunn, who she did the Sweeney Sisters with, and then also a very thin Alec Baldwin. Oh, Brenda the Waitress. Such a good sketch. I am way over my time, so I'm just gonna, you guys are familiar with Golden Girls, and let's go to the next slide where I was gonna be like, hey, these guys, right? They're awesome. If you haven't seen Broad City, check it out. There's a clip. Amy Sedaris showing them a terrible apartment. So if you have not seen Broad City, no jokes, go see it. It's really awesome. So I'm going to just go ahead and wrap it up. But general conclusion is that, you know, women have been in comedy for quite some time. And so I think especially more recently, you've seen women evolve from kind of a foil for a comedic, traditionally male counterpart, with some exception, to people that are actually producing their own shows. And I think with the advent of people being able to have their own web series, produce the web series, get it out there, and as long as it's quality goods, then the, you know, market will decide whether or not they're able to reach a wider audience than they have previously. I also wanted to just offer for anyone in the room, I myself in the continued self-talk and self-awareness of things that you think. If you've ever been putting together a show or a troupe and you found yourself thinking this, these guys are good, but I need 2 girls. Check what logic that stems from. Women can actually contribute, as you've seen in the sketches that I've shown, and kind of the rich history of women in comedy. They can be physical, they can be witty, they can be schlubby, they can be incisive, they can be a straight man, or they can also drive a scene. So stop thinking, if you have found yourself in this thought pattern in the past of women simply as a kind of quota to fill, versus someone who can bring character as well as a unique point of view to whatever show that you might be producing or putting together. So with that, I'll close.
Well, that's it for this episode of Got Your Back's Comedy Nerd Out. We want to say thank you for watching. If you'd like to check out more episodes from us at Got Your Back Podcast, you can go to GYBpodcast.com for episodes, or you can search for Got Your Back on whatever podcasting service you use. iTunes, Stitcher, we're on all of them. If you could drop us a rate and review, we would also appreciate that as well.